Start and give it to me.
Got it. Just making it.
Recording is there, no? Or it will be recorded in YouTube.
Yeah.
Recording is there, no? So it will be recorded in YouTube.
Yeah.
Recording is there, no? So it will be recorded in YouTube. We start.
Give me 1 minute, sir. Basically, you are getting go from here. Okay. Now we are ready with this. Okay. So, can we start, sir?
Yeah.
Good evening, all. Welcome all to the monthly web lecture series of CMPI. This month, we have Dr. Raghavendra Holla from Ruby Hall Clinic, Pune, and sir did a Ph.D. in area of moving target and small field dosimetry using novel film method from Institute of Technology and Science, and sir did PG diploma in radiological physics from BARC. So sir has a many research publication in national and international journals, and sir have a research interest in developing and investigating novel dosimetric methodology, and interesting these innovations in clinical radiotherapy to improve therapeutic gain in cancer radiotherapy. So I will request to sir to start his topic on word of stereotactic treatment, SRS, SRT, and SBRT. And if anyone want to ask, anyone have any questions, so can put here in chat box, and we'll discuss all the questions at the end of talk. So please.
Thank you. Good evening to everyone. I would like to thank the CMPI team for giving me this opportunity. Let's discuss about the world of stereotactic treatments. Though the word stereotactic is almost now phasing out, we are replacing. I'll come to that one. Stressing on SRS, SRT, and SBRTs. So this is the outline of my discussion. I'd like to touch upon the histories and the basic concepts of SRS, SRT, and SBRTs, and some of the delivery systems what are available in the market as of now, and some of the basics QA. I will not touch or stress much on the small field dosimetry because that itself is a huge topic and calls for a separate discussion. So stereo, the word stereo, it's a Greek word. The meaning of the Greek word for the stereo is solid or three-dimensional. Tact means Latin, again is a Latin word to touch. That means a solid to touch or three-dimensional to touch. That is the actual meaning of the stereotact, the word stereotact. It is the stereotactic radiosurgery or stereotactic radiotherapy that is based on the number of fractions we differentiate it. If it is a single fraction, we call it as surgery. If it is more than one fraction, if the number of fractions are more than one, up to 5 or 8 or 3, 5, 8, that is how usually it is done. That is a fractionated radiosurgery. We call it as stereotactic radiotherapy. If it is intracranial, we use the SRS, SRT word. There is no hard and fast rule on this, but it is the conventional use of the words. SRS, SRT is generally used for intracranial. When we move out of the intracranial, that means extracranial lesions, we use the word SBRT, the stereotactic body radiotherapy or stereotactic ablative radiotherapy, SABR. They replaced with these two words. Looking into the history of that, the earlier development of SRS, we started it in the era of 1908. The stereotactic method, it was developed in London by Victor Horsley, Professor Victor Horsley and Robert H. Clerk. They designed an apparatus called Horsley-Clerk apparatus. Actually, it is not used on humans though. They used on an animal. Basically, they wanted to reach an anatomical part of that particular animal very precisely, in the absence of any sort of immobilization. They thought they will design something so that the coordinates of that point which they want to reach inside the patient or inside an animal should be very accurate. That is what they actually were investigating, and they came out with the stereotactic model. So in 1947 to 1951, the two stereotactic devices used for brain surgery in humans. One is by Weisses, Henry T. Weisses and Ernest A. Spiegel. So he designed a stereotactic frame which can be fixed on the skull. Similarly, Lars Leksell, we all very much familiar with this particular name, is a Swedish neurosurgeon. He introduces the concept of radiosurgery. That means the frame what is used for basically for neuronavigation systems. These are the frames, stereotactic frames. Apart from radiosurgery, the radiation oncology, it's used very well actually in the neurosurgery field, even for the functional neurosurgery team, or even for biopsies. They use this kind of frame based work, the neuronavigation what we call it. They need to reach a specific nerve with precision so that they can do some surgeries on that particular area. That's the interest here for a neurosurgeon. In 1967, the first gamma knife patient treated at Studsvik nuclear plant near to Stockholm. And coming back to the linear accelerator based one in 1978, the Russell A, he uses the CT used in SRS, and accordingly the linear accelerator came into picture with the stereotactic works. These are the pictures of some of them. The Horsley and Clerk, what you are seeing here, this is the guy. And in 1947, and this Spiegel and Weisses, this is the test, the stereotactic frame which they were actually innovating. This is how they were using actually. There is an object placed here, and with the help of a different frame system, a needle can be inserted inside the brain precisely to a place where they actually want, with the very good accuracy. So this is Professor Lars Leksell, the inventor of the gamma knives, and 1951 to 53, this is how actually he used. But before the gamma knife era, the Leksell had a deep X-ray system. If you see this particular picture, it's a deep X-ray system. He places a frame across around the patient's skull, and using this X-ray cone, deep X-ray up to 250 to 280 cone, where the cone can be moved in this particular axis precisely, but it is touching here precisely so that this can be focused to the tumor. That is how he started using radiosurgery in the brain using X-ray before the gamma knife era. So now we have plenty of technology for this work. We have gamma knife by Elekta, of course the latest one, which uses about 192 to 201 beams of cobalt 60 of about 30 millicurie each, and all beams aim at target position precisely, like what you are seeing in this particular picture. Each point, what you are seeing, the red dots here, are collimators which actually opens up for the radiation to pass through. Then we got linear accelerators. We have started, something like Brain Labs Novalis is available, and Cyberknife by Accuracy, where you want to have a frameless system, and Elekta and Variant, they have their own systems for radiosurgeries. It is dedicated to radiosurgery. And the new entry to all these things are the ZAP. It's a gyroscope based linear accelerator, where you can see here. We will discuss about this. and the proton beam machines. These are the current model of the methodology of delivering the system radiation for the SRS. Now, traditional LINAC, we have stereotactic cones like what you can see here, from 5 millimeter to 60 millimeter diameter. We have various sizes. The advantage of this is, there is no uncertainty of the size, field size, unlike the linear accelerators, MLCs. When you discuss about the MLCs, we talk about the tolerance of the MLC, because MLC comes to a position of request and goes out of the position on request. That means they are movable. So whenever you have something which is moving and coming inside the field, their accuracy comes at stake. That means they cannot give you an accuracy of less than 1 millimeter in size. Whereas the cone is fixed in diameter, it cannot be changed. It's all, the laser cutting or the robo-brazed cones. Once you fix it onto this particular LINAC head or collimator, if your fixation is perfect, the size what it projects on the isocenter is always quoted one, the measured one or fixed one. So that is the advantage of the cones, which is always advisable. But one disadvantage what I find it is, sometimes if you want to use a bigger cone like 15 millimeter diameter or 20 millimeter diameter, you see this is always a circle, sphere. So you don't have any chances of modulation other than the beam angle. The beam angle or the beam weight modulation only is the possible, whereas the collimator modulation is not possible. When you place the MLC over this or instead of this, then that modulation is possible. But as I said, the size is a constraint here. If the tumor is small, like by convention about 5 mm to 10 mm size of tumor, we advise cone because it is more or likely sphere. The tumor itself is circular or sphere in size, so accuracy is very important. Otherwise, if it is more than 10 to 12 millimeter of size, then definitely you can look at the MLCs. That means the thumb rule is, if you are able to use at least 3 to 4 MLC leaf per segment, then you can use MLC. Otherwise, better to use cone only. So the variant is having something latest one called the Edge or the True Beam, which is having a multi-leaf of collimator of 120 leaf multi-leaf collimators. Center leaves are 2.5 millimeter width at isocenter of 32 pairs. Peripheral of 5 mm of 28 pairs, giving us total about 40 by 22 centimeter of field sizes. Whereas in this 22 centimeter by 40, in that the central part about 10 to 11 centimeter is of high resolutions, remaining all little bit moderate medium resolution one. It can go around as normal linear accelerator, but advantage here is the 6-dimensional couch, so that you can take care of, in addition to the 3-dimension X, Y, Z, you can take care of the pitch, yaw and roll. These 3 additional coordinates can also be used for setting up anatomically. The cone beam CT is a part of this mission. Similarly, the competitor to this is the Versa HD by Electra guys. They have Apex MLC, but the difference is the Apex is a tertiary MLC where you actually you place it whenever you want and you remove that MLC whenever the case is done. That means you are adding up one additional uncertainty of placement or hooking up the MLC to the linear accelerator. That is the difference between Varian and Electra, because the Varian is fixed one, always you are using this as a fixed MLC, whereas in Electra the Apex has to be docked into the machine whenever there is a case. Otherwise, more or less the features are same. Both of them will give you 5 photon energies of 2 triple F beams and remaining 3 of flattened beams. So we have a frameless system. Those systems of linear accelerator, if you are looking for a very small tumor like trigeminal neuralgia, where the tumor size itself is about 4 millimeter or 5 millimeter, you need to fix the frame to the patient's skull. We will discuss about what is a frame and what is the advantage of that frame. If you are looking at non-frame or frameless radiosurgeries, this is the choice actually, CyberKnife, where actually if you see here, this part is the linear accelerator part, is the X-band LINAC, the high frequency one, X-band LINAC compared to the S-band of linear accelerators. So there's very sized, very precise and very tiny, the whole weight of this linear accelerator is about 200 pounds, not more than that. So, but so that they can fix this into a arm which is actually controlled by a KUKA robot, the same robot which manufacturers like car industries, like the neurosurgeons in the surgeries, the OT based robotic robotic surgeries, they also use the same KUKA platform, S6 or S7. Now actually the current one is the S7 model which is running. I worked a bit on M6 model platform. They're the same platform which a car manufacturer also uses. The advantage here is it is having 6 joints, that means 6 degrees of freedom available for this head itself. So patient will be lying on that. Further, this can be robotic or non-robotic. You have all the pitch, roll, yaw and XYZ on the couch. Plus you have another 6 motors or 6 joints which can position the linear accelerator in any angle. So that is the advantage of that, and the positional accuracy of this is about 0.2 to 0.3 millimeter. So that is what actually you can claim on a CyberKnife. That is why we say this is a complex machine, but it's very, very useful in the tumors like very small size like the neuralgia cases. They basically run with the targeting softwares where based on the site, like it may be at the brain or a spine case or a fiducial based prostate or a lung, you need to select the protocol first, and based on that protocol the targeting software gets activated, and the machine is having floor mounted detector and ceiling mounted X-rays. These takes constantly, irrespective of the linear accelerator position, this takes the images. That is the difference between a LINAC and a CyberKnife. In a LINAC, what happens when you set up the patient, you take the pre-CBCT, that means the CBCT of the patients, the cone beam computer tomography of the patients just after the setup before the treatment. So online imaging wise, if you want to take the images, the LINAC has to be off. So LINAC cannot be on parallelly when the image is being acquired. Whereas in CyberKnife, this is affixed to the floor and the ceiling, whereas CyberKnife moves freely without the dependency of that. So the imaging is done intrafractionally, like constantly. You can say, okay, I want to take orthogonal X-rays of for every 15 milliseconds or every 30 milliseconds. The system keeps on acquiring the images and looking where is the patient, and whenever there is a movement or any adjustment has to be done, that correction has to go back to the robot arms, and robot, before going to the next position, robot corrects it and goes to the next position. So that is the advantage of online imaging, without stopping it. So this is how it is. So for example, if you consider a node, a globe here, actually whatever you're seeing, the the red lines are the paths what a robot can move, and wherever you are seeing the yellow dots are the node where a robot can stop at that particular place and shoot radiation to the tumor. So these yellow dots are called as nodes. There can be up to 130 nodes, and a LINAC can shoot 8 beams, maximum of up to 8 beams per these yellow dots, that means the node. So a typical plan, if you see, is approximately about 40 to 50 nodes or 60 to 75 nodes if you have a full path based on the entries and exit where you want to restrict. So that is how it is. But one disadvantage with this machine is there is no CBCT concept. Whatever we are doing, ultimately we are doing based on the bony anatomy, or sometimes with the grayscale differences of the tumor, like the lung tumor to the lung parallel parenchymal tissues. So that is how actually you see the differences, and you take a call on that. The robot takes the coordinate based on that. There is no CBCT available as of now on this machine, unlike the linear accelerator. So now coming to the next version of Stereotaxis, which actually is now becoming a little famous. If you're lucky, maybe in India, by this year end we should be having 1 or 2 systems of this. This is the Zapex system. The same inventor who invented the edge of Varian and the CyberKnife of Accuray has invented now this, John Edler. He invented this one. This is a self-shielded machine. The machine is having a shielding all around, so that in principle you can place it on the corridor and treat. That is how the company is promoting it. You don't need a bunker at all. You just need to have a dedicated place where you can place this and treat. But the patient is here, patient gets inside. When the patient gets inside, it's completely locked here. The patient is inside that, and everywhere there is a shield. and there is a linear accelerator and a detector. The whole system of LINAC is placed on a gyroscope. So the advantage of that is it's free to move in all 3 dimensions, with a very high speed. So it is having cone beam CT also. The image also is coming here, and you can treat in all directions, but only the limitation is of a skull based one. Intracranial, you cannot get into the extracranial treatment using this machine as of my knowledge. So I don't have much information about it. This is just evolving technology. Now, as I said, why do we need a stereo, the word stereo attached to this? What actually is stereo? Stereo is actually more than one. As you said, it is always more than one. Stereo, we heard of stereo in our conventional sound system also. When we have a mono versus stereo, that means more than one directions. So here what happens is, I fix something onto the patient's skull, and for that I fix something called a localizer, like this, a localizer, which is a radio opaque material, localizers. So then I take one CT scan on that. So in my CT scan, see this position A and position C is fixed on the localizer, and if I take a CT scan here in this plane, the A and C is fixed, but this line, which is a slanted line, that is why it's called as N frame, this is B. B is different for different slices. If I take a ratio of D, the delta of AB divided by AC, that varies, that represents the fraction of diagonal rod B that extends from top to the rod A to the point of intersection of rod B. This one with the CT scan plane. So all of these geometric relationships are valid even if actually A and C are not parallel to each other. That means while placing the frame or while fixing the frame, the frame is not fixed perfectly onto the skull. You are fixing the frame first. On top of that frame, you are placing this localizer during the scan only. So A and C need not be always parallel to each other. Still, the relationship between A, B, C remains the same wherever actually you are going. Depending on A and C, A, B is there. The B position tells where is A and where is C. So that is how actually the simple principle. So this is how actually. So there are 3 N frames placed on the patient skull. One is, 2 are on the lateral side and one is in the anterior side of the patient's, this one. This is how actually it is. Sorry. So if you see, there is one frame fixed here. On this frame, we'll fix this localizer on that. When you fix the localizer on that, there is one frame coming into the anterior side, one in the lateral side, one in the right lateral side. So this is how actually it appears on that. And if you take a CT scan of that patient with this frame, this is how the dots appear. 3, 4, if you see like 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9. Here, if you see here, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 like this, if you take, the position of 3 and 4 is fixed. Position of 1 and 3 is fixed. Position of 4 and 6 are fixed. And again here 6 and 7 and 1, 9 and 9, 7. These positions are fixed in the CT scan from throughout, because you see here the lines are parallel to each other. Whereas there is one slanted line here that images, that means the point 2 here, point 5 here, point 8 here gets varying. It may go towards this side one angle, towards this side another. That means if you scan from the cranial side, these 2 points merge there. When you come towards the caudal side, these 2 points are actually quite away from one each other. That merges with this point. So this is how you see them in the CT scan. This is how you see them in the CT scan. So like this, we have from one side of the patient to the entire skull. If you take this scan of the patient, for every slice you have A11, A12, A13, like for different slices, and same thing from A21, the position of 2, A22, A23, like this. If you put it in a matrix, so you have a position of one coordinate with respect to all these N frame coordinates, and that coordinate what you are seeing is a CT coordinate. So CT coordinate, when you do a summation or a matrix transformation of that CT coordinate, you get a stereo coordinate. That means you have reached the CT coordinate, one particular point in the patient anatomy, using these many points together, a matrix transformation of that you have done to reach rigid XYZ. This XYZ on the frame, on the localizer. If you see this XYZ on the localizer, you can mark on that localizer, which is very easily markable. The mark corresponds to the point XY1 inside the patient's brain. So this is the beauty of this one. So I hope everybody understood. If any confusion is there, you can always ask me in the last section. Now the same theory is applied extracranially, but for some reason it didn't work out, because when you are looking into the intracranial one, there is a part where you have screwed that frame into the patient's skull. You know, it's an invasive procedure. You have screwed it up so that it becomes a rigid transformation. In case of extracranial one, there is no connection between this frame or a localizer to the patient's body. Patient is lying on the vacculock and you are keeping a frame out of the vacculock. What if the patient position in the vacculock is in or out? This stereo coordinate cannot understand that, and it gives a rigid coordinate, but patient position is not represented properly by this one. So that's the reason people stopped using it now for extracranial. So this is how the Lexel frame looks like. There are 4 pokes here. You can see 1, 2, 3, 4 coming here. This is the anterior part. There is a nose bridge here. You can see, so that his nose is open out of this here. So this is a nose bridge. This will be coming into the anterior part, now this part of the brain, skull, and this is hooked into the posterior part of the soup. So this is actually nosy procedure, and it's fixed. It's mainly done by neurosurgeons. And once this is placed on the patient's body, so this is the localizer, which I say the latest localizer. You know, you can see Yan frame here. This Yan can be filled either with, it's a hollow pipe actually, Yan. You can either fill with the CT contrast to have enhancement, or if you are looking only for MR, you can even fill it with MR contrast or copper or something like that, so that you can see them properly in MR images also. So this is placed over a patient's skull, like if the patient is, you know, this is how a patient is, you know, for posterior poles and anterior poles. You have nicely screwed the patient into that. It's very rigid now, and this is placed on this, hooked on this during CT scan. But as I said, it's an invasive procedure. It involves neurosurgeons, and it's like a surgery. You know, you do it in the morning, early morning, you start fixing the frame, and you need to treat the patient on the same day. Patient cannot go home, or patient cannot be admitted with the frames on. So that is one of the major limitation of this. It is invasive. It is not at all user friendly in that aspect. So immediately the invention started to come out with a frameless intracranial positioning. Here it does almost the same work of a frame based one, but of course the accuracy cannot be questioned. The frame based one accuracy cannot be questioned. This has got a little bit of flexibility. I tell you why it is. See, this works on a dental fixture. For example, one system, you know, they give you a dental fixture one. You make this mold to the patient's dental, and it's like a mouth bite. You place it on that patient's mouth bite, and on top of this you fix and place the localizer. This is one system which is available with one vendor. Like that, there are another system like Electra gives you something like dental one, but to that dental one they give you a vacuumized system where you can suck the vacuum and make sure that this dental fix is fixed properly to the upper palate of the patient, and on top of that you fix a localizer so that patient is rigid at the time of simulation as well as during the treatment. But that is having a limitation, like, you know, this is not 100% properly done, because this is based on that day's patient. Patient may be having some dental cavity, or some of the teeth may be missing. So more and more tooths are missing. That means the fixing is not going to be proper, and it is up to the patient's comfortness. If he is having some pain during the vacuum procedure, he may try to adjust his position a little bit accordingly. So you may get an error of about 2 mm if I am right. So you cannot claim the accuracy anything less than 2 mm using these frames. So that's why another frameless system, as I said, the CyberKnife, which has got a different tracking algorithm, as I said, already discussed about it. But it does the work with the help of camera A and camera B, takes the constant image and repositions the patient. So I'm working more on a linear accelerator nowadays, so I'll stress more on LINAC based SBRT or SRT only. So now coming to the recommendations, you may have a linear accelerator which you have purchased 2 years or 3 years advance in back, and at that time you didn't look for the SRS SRT program in your center, but a neurosurgeon joins and says, I want to start it, or your radiation oncologist says, I want to start it, then you will be in dilemma whether the same LINAC can be tuned to give the accuracy required for SRS SRT. So nothing to worry, there are guidelines. So if you go back to the guidelines, this is one of the guidelines by task group by American Association of Physics in Medicine 142. So you can actually see the guidelines for SBRT or SRS SRT. Wherever we had like 2 millimeter, it has come down to 1 millimeter. Like, you know, isocenter 2 millimeter for a general conventional LINAC. If you're able to maintain with plus or minus 1 millimeter for gantry, couch, collimator, and mechanical isocenter, that machine is good enough for going with the stereotactic programs. In addition to that, you know that the localization error of your laser should be within 1 millimeter. Collimator size indicator should be 1 millimeter. The couch position or the rotational aspects here, which was about 1 degree previously for gantry and the couch, has come down to 0.5 degree, little more strict. So if your LINAC is satisfying this criteria, definitely you can get into the stereotactic program in your center. Now, let me stress more on some of the uncertainties or some of the mistakes what we do in our general program. So instead of discussing more on the stereotactic basics, I thought, no, let me get into the real pictures here, so that people who are understanding this can get into this and make sure that these mistakes they don't do it. So simulation accuracy, what do you mean by simulation accuracy? When you simulate a patient using a CT scan or MRI or whatever the imaging you are doing, there are a lot of uncertainties involved in the procedure itself. For example, when you commission a CT scan, we have limitations of CT scan, the slice accuracy, the slice thickness accuracy, the slice position accuracies. All those things account for about 0.4 to 1.4 millimeter of inaccuracies during the simulation. So this recommended simulation slice thickness for CT is 1 millimeter or less. That is very important, and at the same time it is very easy nowadays to get 1 millimeter from any CT scan. As I said, the achievable accuracy, the Kargar et al. Reported a CT accuracy of 0.4 millimeter. That means you can get into an accuracy of 0.4 millimeter in a CT scan. That again depends on what is your oxal size, what is your field of interest, DFO, the scan field of volume, all those matters here. But if you're good enough, your CT scan is commissioned pretty well, then definitely you can reach an accuracy level of about 0.4, which includes the spatial accuracy of your CT and the gantry accuracy and the slice accuracy, slice interspace thickness accuracy, at the same time the couch accuracies. So the similar one in terms of MR is not less than 1.4 millimeter. That again depends on the MR device and the Tesla, and all those information comes into picture. How good the engineer has commissioned the MR is also making big differences here. So talking about MR, we have another major issues in MR is the MR image distortion. The MR distortion is about 2 millimeter across the 30 centimeter field of view. If you are scanning a 30 centimeter, the 300 mm of field of view, you expect an error of about 2 millimeter in the MR distortion, image distortion. That is actually in the direction of the magnetic, where the magnetization application of the magnet, how you have applied, in which direction, whether the encoder has been done from left to right or anterior to posterior, based on that distortion varies. So, however, the delineation accuracy depends on imaging parameters. So, as per the task group 66, the simulation procedure should standardize the scan protocols. You should know what actually has to be done. For example, if you are looking for a tumor like trigeminal neuralgia, what are the MR sequences you should go? Like whether you want 3D vista image or vista imaging, what should be the axis of imaging? For example, MR, if you trigeminal neuralgia, if you are taking plain axial images, you may not see the nerve at all. So that information you should be knowing, and you should be able to give it to the MR tech, so that you make sure that the MR images are used properly in your center. So the contrast, what type of contrast, and what is the effect of those contrast on the CT calculations, the accuracy of CT calculations, etc. So once the MR image is done or the CT image is done, next thing you do is the image fusion. Image fusion, most of the time you do automatically, just you go for auto fusion, you select the boundaries and say, okay, fuse it. But remember, auto goes with a very gross image way of, pixel intensity mapped based concepts, which may not fit always, because suppose you have an artifact in your system, or you have selected bigger images, all those information, more information than what actually is required, like whole of brain you require, or whole of abdomen you have taken for matching. It goes for an average position. So when it goes for an average position, the position of interest, like the tumor where you are looking for, may have some error actually. So it's always better to get it checked. At the same time, the fusion accuracy from your CT to MRI, again, there are 1,000 ways of checking that. You can actually simply go with small phantom. You make some inhomogeneities, make some specific structures in that phantom, go for CT, go for MR, and come and fuse and see how good you are actually able to fuse them. And there are phantoms ready-made available actually, like Lucy phantom and all, where MR, the fusion can be possible. The day from CT to MR registration is in the phantom study shows is not less than 2 millimeter. So this much inaccuracy is always there. Why I'm saying all those inaccuracies here in terms of quantified way is, in most of the centers I have seen, especially when they are doing stereotactic works and linear accelerator based stereotactic works, they come and say, I want just GTV to be planned and GTV to be analyzed and GTV to be treated. This is what a neurosurgeon, a radiation oncologist will speak out to you. But be careful. You say that this point points to them actually. You know what is your isocenter accuracy, you know what is the achievable accuracy in CT, achievable accuracy in MR, and achievable accuracy in MR registration, CT MR registration, on which they are going to use the contouring aspects. Combining all of them, if you combine all of them, it cannot be zero. It cannot be zero. That means your CTV to PTV margin has to be there, even it is SRS program. That's what I wanted to stress upon. So understand the limitation of fusion methods applied to different treatment sites. Like the brain, you may use a simple skull method of fusion. The same thing is not applicable. Like in case of the soft tissues, there are organ-based matching. You mark the organ in CT, mark the same organ in MR, and say that match organ to organ. So this kind of method you may have to adopt based on where actually you are looking for the fusion accuracies. So as I said, the distortion of the MR, again, of course, now there are a lot of new machines, they apply this image distortion correction algorithms, but these corrections still not very, very precise and very, very accurate, because whatever the distortion happens, they stretch it or they push it or compress it and try to match it with the actual realities. That is the correction what happens, but it may not be always true. So there could be up to 1.8 millimeter of shift of MR images relative to the CT and delivered dose. The shift is actually towards the frequency of encoding. Suppose in this first image, if you see the frequency encoding is from left to right, the white one is the CT, the MR, how is it showing, and the black one is the CT, how is it showing. So this is distorted towards this side. Same thing in case of anterior posterior, you can see the distortion here towards the encoding direction of anterior posterior. So this is corrected, this comes back to 99%, it comes back after correction, but still that 1% itself could damage us. That's what we need to watch. Looking into the treatment planning, after commissioning, we have identified appropriate users and limitations of the TPS. The goal is to detect the deviations, how accurately my treatment planning system calculates the dose. If you look at these particular aspects now, compared to what we had maybe 10 years back, we had a lot of database systems on the market at that time, like pencil beam algorithm, like Ergos we had, and even Eclipse we had pencil beam algorithms, from where we started to model based algorithms as convolution or superposition algorithms, and now we are coming towards the Monte Carlo based algorithms. There is a difference in the way we look towards. Whereas in case of the database system, like the pencil beam algorithm, that particular algorithm uses the information what you feed to the system. This is very important. So when the system uses information what is fed to the system, information should be very accurate, otherwise output is wrong. It is like you are putting an input to the system, the algorithm uses that input and gives you the output dose calculations. If your input is wrong, output is wrong also. So to some extent the same thing is continued even in the model based system. In a model based system also we have a model, like you have a rock, you pour the water on the rock, the water takes the shape of the rock. That is a model. The model is a rock and you are pouring the water is a modeling process. So this is the adaptation. So you adapt the model to the existing database of your system or to the existing data of your system. So here also it depends on your data. Your data measurement should be very accurate so that the model what you're going to adopt also will be accurate. Once the model is done, definitely dose calculation is also accurate. Now we are into the third generation, or we can say gold standard, where I don't need a data at all. I need a data only for verification. That means the data, the machine is modeled using a Monte Carlo codes. So we know it's the transport problem, the beam transport, the number of electrons, how it is generated, how it is developed, how it is interacting. If one interaction happens, what is the number of photons generated? All those things comes into picture. Then accumulation of those things gives us the dose. So we track from where the originated the electron, and we come into the source where the target. We know the composition of the target. We know how many interactions happens and how many electrons gets converted into X-rays. Once it's converted, how they travel towards the patient. So when we have this model, that means the model Monte Carlo system should have precise information about the linear accelerator compositions. It needs to have the target compositions, the exact distance, thickness, everything should be available with that particular model, and using that we start the transport problem and we get the derived dose at the center. So this is more precise. So now coming to the small field dosimetry problem what we have. In model based systems or database systems, as I said, if the data is wrong, your output is also wrong. But in case of a Monte Carlo algorithm, if your data is wrong, your output is not influenced so much. That means the Monte Carlo dose system is not taking the measured value what you are measured. It only uses the final dose normalization based on your output. It don't use anything for dose calculation. That should be very clear. So this is the reason which everybody says I need a Monte Carlo dose algorithm, because at the level of commissioning itself the inaccuracies are less compared to the model or database system. So but still that doesn't mean that you don't have to measure. We need to measure it, but we need to measure only for verifying whether model calculated values are accurate enough or are they good when I measure it also. So whatever my planning system by the end of the day gives should be there on the patients, right? So that is why we need to have something called a testing for the planning system once we commission it. The RPC from MD Anderson or the USA suggests that 80% of the institutions can achieve dosimetric accuracy of plus or minus 7%. That means remaining 20% cannot even achieve that 7%. That 20% is the one which we need to try to push towards this 80%. That is the only way forward for us. So there are thousands of materials available. Please go through that. Like TG53 provides comprehensive guidelines for QA of the treatment planning systems. And what are the errors coming actually? Should that whenever the TPS upgrade happens, there's changes in the source modeling, the changes in the transport modeling will influence the dose calculation. So we need to be very careful at that particular time also. It's not a one-time problem. So commissioning time, definitely, as I said, the small field dosimetry becomes a big challenge for a physicist, and because as you see here, as the chamber volume becomes bigger than the source volume, the occlusion happens here and the penumbra effects are more, all those uncertainties. I don't want to get into that because as I said, it is a separate problem. So in principle, this is what actually happens in the small field dosimetry. And another question comes as a physicist is, when I am involved in a commissioning process, which detector to choose actually. What should I do? What should I demand from the management? I want this or I want that. Remember, nothing is gold standard here. All of them give you error. Which gives the minimum error again is in our hand only. How accurately we can place the chamber, how accurately I can use that chamber. So people say diamond, even diamond you can see here is far away from the Monte Carlo. So Monte Carlo, if I say here, this is the green line Monte Carlo, even diamond is far away from Monte Carlo. And see the film in that extent. Film is very close to also is Monte Carlo. Look at the other things like pinpoint chambers and all that far away from this. So there are various reasons. If you get into the actual publications, you know why this pinpoint is here, why this is here. You can attribute the reasons for all those variations happening. As you cross about 20 mm of size, everything is good enough after that. What we are talking here is a 14% variations for less than 20, that means about 5 mm to 20 mm, 14% variations among the chambers itself will influence the cone factors. So cone factor is a factor which you are entering in the treatment planning system, which is used for dose normalization. So if you have a 14% variations in your chamber cone factor based on your chambers, remember your MUs calculated, the monitored unit calculated also will have this 14%. So one simplest way is people use diode. Okay, I agree, the diode is the very highly sensitive, the signal to noise ratio is fantastic, so that you can actually use this as for a very small field size also. Agreed. But look at that, the linearity of the diode, whether the diode is doing really a good job, because a diode is, it is from one diode to another diode, there can be differences. It can be directional differences, there can be a signal to noise ratio differences, and all those things. When you check that, if you have a normalization concept, normalized versus normalized, unnormalized reading, inverse of this normalized, they should be actually very close to 1. If they're very close to 1, this is the test which we used to do in the 7 knife. When we start our diode measurement, first thing to do is you give at different SADs, you give the same MU and calculate how is the signal here. Then say normalize with respect to your inverse square law of at the 600, 700, 800, 900. That means your chamber is following a proper inverse square law. The chamber follows a proper inverse square law. That means the chamber's response is also doing good, because you have measured from 600, same MU you have given, 1000 you have given the same MU. So both parameter works. If the red line remains at very close to the 1, that means your chamber is doing good job. So you can use that particular chamber. Now looking into the output factor measurements, you can have a reference daisy chain actually. We don't normalize a small 2x2 field size to 10x10 field size. Go for an intermediate field sizes in between and normalize the output to that, so that you are minimizing the error. So this is a recommended method of doing it. Once you measure the output corrections, output calculations, you have done it, you have measured it, don't use the direct output corrections. There is something in between, usually for a small field. So that is the difference in the detector response in the clinical field of beam quality, F clinical. This has to be applied. So these differences, that means the chamber response for 5 millimeter versus 20 millimeter is not the same, especially for the diodes. They are not the same. So they are differences. There is a difference between the chamber response itself. So that chamber response can be simulated using Monte Carlo corrections or Monte Carlo algorithm. There are publications available, especially by the team, the Francison and Kilby's team. They have almost simulated the most of the available chambers actually, and they have given the response ratios for all the chambers from small field size to the big field size. You use that particular chamber response and correct it, or if you are good enough, you are good in Monte Carlo, you simulate your corrections, your chamber, and re-simulate the chamber response and get the correction factors and apply that. So once you apply the correction factor, that is the actual true output factor, instead of taking the raw information from the diodes, especially for the diodes. So once you do all those exercises, don't blindly apply it. there are machines available. You may have a variant true beam available next to your center. Check with them what is their parameter. You may have an Electra center sitting in your friend's office. You check with him what is his parameter. Like this, for every machine there are availables. There are golden data availables. There are literatures available for all those correction factors and everything. Check with them how far you are. You are very close to that. There is no reason for all these modern Linacs to vary the output factor from one center to another center by more than 1 or 2%. So you should be within 3%. If you ask me, my personal experience is within 3%. If your output factors with respect to your neighbors or company recommended values, you are very close and you are very good work you have done it. So verify that. So these are understand the chambers, what chamber you have, and how you can use it and where you have to use it. What are the advantages as well as the disadvantages of each chamber. There are publications available. There are many of the advantages discussed in detail. So understand them. Discuss with your seniors if you have questions on that. And because by the end of the day, you have commissioned the treatment planning system, you have commissioned the imaging system, you have ensured that your fusion is accurate, then get into the E2E testing. So in terms of E2E testing, we go with the basics of CT, immobilization, CT, MR, planning and treatment. Everything has to happen on a phantom before you take the patients. So if your E2E passes, that means you are ready to go with your patients. So this test has to be done before that. So why we are so specific on the tight margins, or the dose falls should be very sharp, or why I should go for a stereotactic frame. This one slice tells us everything. Here you see, if there is a tumor of 5 mm, 6 mm, 7 mm, by giving 1 mm extra margin, you are having an increase of 73% volume with respect to a 5 mm volume. By giving 7 mm, that means by 2 mm margin, you are increasing 175% of margin. Remember, the tumor may be same 2 mm here, but you are given, because of your uncertainty, you are given 2 mm extra margin. That means you are irradiating that much of extra normal structures to a high dose. So that may be a detrimental to the patient's life. So that has to be done. Looking to the QAs, the basic and very important test is Winston-Lutz test. Everybody has to learn, everybody has to do it. Company provides most of the gadgets. If not, it's not a rocket science. You can actually develop it at your center itself by just considering something like this and something like this, a pin with a 5 mm margin or something like a strip to place the film. Basically what we need, something here, the Linac is giving this radiation which should fall on this one, and the image of that or the projection of that should be falling on the film, which all should be in the same line, so that when you turn the gantries, you should know what is the accuracy of that. That is what Winston-Lutz test requires. So you can develop it by, if you have a gapromic film on this spot, you will see an ideal case like this, where you see a projection of that bearing here. What you placed on the isocenter is here, whereas the actual cone dimension is here. The projection should be centric to the cone dimension or cone images in all the gantry and couch rotations. That's what you are seeing. So now you get a phantom also with fixing. They are very expensive phantoms. They look fancy. You don't need it, as I said. You can do with the simple setup of your own center. And if you have good budget, definitely there are added advantages. You can go up to many other parameters to be measured. So this is how actually we do it for different gantry angles, 0, 90 or whatever the frequency you want to do, because they won't cost you much, one strip of film only. You can see how this is moving towards, whether it is moving towards gantry or the floor or left, right, you can account for that. This decides what is the actual accuracy of your isocenter and how much margin accordingly you have to give for your tumor target to the PTV. So the planning wise, ideal is to put a lot of non-coplanar in case of intracranial one. Now we don't put static beam at all. We move towards the converging arcs, centric. It can be the multiple isocentric also, but that depends on how far is one tumor to the another tumor. That's all. I will come to that later, why we need it. So target dose is delivered through the series of gantry arcs. Arc angles are usually smaller than about 180 degree to avoid parallel opposed beams. but that is also not hard and fast rule with the latest optimizers like optimizers, multi-resolution optimizers, where it takes care of the dose fall in all the directions. So once you have done a good plan, then there are a lot of indices if you want to analyze it in the initial days, like the conformity index. You take that as a representative so that you know that spatially you are not going to miss it and you are not going to spill over to the other areas also. And the gradient index just gives us an information how sharp is the dose fall. There are gradient index and gradient measure. Index is a value number here actually. The ideal good is about 3. Similarly, for a conformity index, the value is about 1 or anything about 1 to 1.1. Don't go for less than 1, don't go for more than 1.1 or 1.2 also. That's the ideal situation here. So gradient index recommended value is less than 3 to 3.5. Sometimes it is impossible because this all depends on the size of the tumor, what volume of the tumor you want to irradiate. So how it is decided? Now comes to the question here, how gradient index varies with the isodose prescription. Let us look at one example here. If you have a tumor size to be treated of about 10 cc, then isodose prescription versus gradient measure. This is not gradient index, this is a gradient measure. Here the measure means it is something like 100% isodose line diameter, the radius, to the 50% isodose line radius. The difference of that is the gradient measure. That is how the variant actually looks into instead of gradient index. So suppose I prescribe for about 50 to 60% isodose line. You look at my conformity index is very high. That means almost 3 times the size of the tumor I am irradiating, whereas my gradient index is very close to 1. So now as I come down with increase the prescription line here, and what happens the conformity index here? Conformity index also comes down. So conformity index very close to 1 here, and the gradient index is also very, very small. The gradient measure here should be as small as possible. That means my 50% and 100% isodose should be in the same line. That means the gradient measure should be 0. That's what I'm looking for. So, but this is actually a sort of saturated or a plateau region here, and the conformity index also becomes 1. Then if I increase the prescription line to 93, 94, 96, the gradient index starts increasing further. So this is the feature where you have to see. The ideal is something like here 1, if you see. So this is the area where you can look for a good prescription if the tumor size is more than about 10 cc. Same thing if you repeat the same exercises for a small tumor like the trigeminal case where the tumor size is less than 0.3 cc. If you see in this example here, the gradient measure increases anything about 90, about 80, 85 if you see, it increases sharply. The increase is also very high. So in this situation, about 1 here and about 70 to 80, we try to prescribe in the lean accelerator. This is how actually you can select what should be the prescription line, because the prescription line is, like when you prescribe here 90% versus 80%, 60, 70, you are increasing this also, the dose inhomogeneity inside. Sometimes this is an added advantage. People ask for dose inhomogeneity, especially for example in case of cases like extra cranial cases, SBRTs, the dose inhomogeneity like the lung cases, you need dose inhomogeneity there. So they try to get into this kind of concept, somewhere about 80 to 90 or something like that. So we don't prefer a very straight dose fall in case of stereotactic works. We prefer to have some sort of high dose, clinically required one. So this is another publication representing the same what I have shown previously. If your isodose line is 50, 60, 70, 80, 90 for a bigger tumor, as the tumor volume increases, there is no big difference in the gradient index for them. Whereas for a small tumor volume, if you are prescribing at 90 versus 50, the gradient index is almost doubled here. So that is why as the tumor volume is small, look for a lower isodose line prescription. As the tumor volume is big, you look for a larger isodose line prescription. This is the take-home message from this one. So the dose inhomogeneity for extracranial cases, why do we need it? As I said, this is the area, this is the gradient factor which we want to prescribe here. If I prescribe here, and this is the low isodose line, so that my gradient factor, the sharp dose fall will happen. So what I do here actually, how to achieve it is, I create a planned ITVs and planned GTV, and between them I keep a margin of about 2 mm here, 2 mm here, and I give a differential dose to this and this and this. So 3 dose lesions. So by doing that, I get a good of about 120-130% up in the center. Like this, you can create like this, and this is how you get a good dose in the center and a smaller dose in the periphery. You prescribe for this, your gradient index all around is superbly done. So this is how actually usually done for the non-cranial cases. In cranial, definitely the index comes by itself. So now the next thing is, like, we may have to place sometimes the gold fiducials or markers inside the tumor. When you place it now, it is not easy to see everything in, especially in the cyberknife cases, for example. I need to have 3 fiducials to track anything, 3 dimension. For example, if I want 6 dimension, I need to have minimum of 3 points. If I put only 1 fiducial, I will only see, I cannot track it. If I put 2, I can only get 2 dimension, not 3 dimension. If you want 3 dimension X, Y, Z, definitely 3 gold markers to be then. So where to put it? Remember, if your gold marker you are placed here and your isocenter is something here and you are trying to treat here. If your isocenter is here and if you're trying to treat here, for every 60 millimeter, Pythagoras theorem, you calculate it. Every 60 millimeter of distance, the tumor center to your isocenter, you are adding up 1 millimeter of inaccuracies in the linear accelerator as well as in the cyberknife. This is the take home one. So ideal situation is this, but sometimes it is not possible. There may be multiple tumors. They want to have this for tracking. The 3 fiducials, they kept it here. Then you see which one is close. You can keep it in the center, or you can have which is the close by one, give a lesser margin, which is far distance from your isocenter or aligned center. In case of cyberknife, you give additional 1 or 2 mm margin to that tumor. So this is how actually clinically it is applied. So another question here is the 60 couch, applying 60 couch. Now everybody wants, okay, I want to have 60 couch. How accurately I can set the patient? Remember, you may have a case like where in this particular situation you have 3 sites to be treated. 3 of them are at the 3 corners of the brain, and in these situations you are putting your isocenter here. So as I said, when you are putting isocenter here and shooting that to here, this 60 millimeter means it is going to give 1 mm of an inaccuracy here, and if it is more than 60, you are going to have 1 mm inaccuracies. So accordingly you give margins, respective to that tumor. The differential margins will be there. That is one thing. Another is, when your isocenter is at this particular point and you are matching with the 60 couch, when you match your tumor to this angle, the other side of the tumor, this side of the tumor is missed by an angle. How much is that? If you give a pitch of 1 degree, if your distance from isocenter to the one tumor is 10 centimeter deviated, then you are deviating this other one by 1.7 millimeter. You apply a simple correction of Pythagoras, you will come to know this. Similarly, if it is 2 degree angle deviations, you are giving pitch. Pitch means it goes in, in this plane. In this plane when you are giving an angulations. If you are giving a 2 degree angle here, if 2 degree angle and your tumor isocenter to the one tumor is 10 centimeter, then that is going to be missed by 3.4 millimeter. So it is not safe to give pitch or any rotational corrections for whatever the system gives. So this has to be kept in mind. In that situations, it's always ideal to go with the multiple isocenter. I may put a separate isocenter here, and separate one, and 3. It may be the treatment time may be a little longer, but I am pretty sure it is very accurate. So how much accuracy we can achieve intracranially? So in the MRCT registrations, as I said, in the AP, craniocaudal and left-right, these are the achievable systematic error. And GTV limitations, CBCT to CT registrations, end-to-end test, and everything by the end of the say, you see nothing is less than 1 millimeter. So don't ever plan any case without 1 millimeter of margin. This is what the take home is in a linear accelerator as well as in cyberknife. If you're looking at lung SBRT, for example, when you're having a concept of 4D CT and ITV, then again the error is more. Here it is not less than 2 in case of systematic. The random error is again 1 to 1.5 millimeter in size. So another issue comes here for spine SBRT. Nowadays, everybody looks into spine SBRT as the the most emerging revenue generating system in the hospitals. Everybody wants to do it because many patients come back with the spine meds. So when you look at the spine, SBRT is done. So here is the case where the spine has to be saved. At the same time, you want to treat the whole of the vertebra. When you do it like this, if you have a different algorithm of dose calculation, you see what happens. Because soft tissue, bone, soft tissue. This is a unique combination where you get soft tissue, bone, soft tissue, and soft tissue should get underdosed, whereas this soft tissue and the bone should be overdosed. This is a unique combination of spine SBRT. When you look into that here, this is the interface, bone, and this is the soft tissue, and this is the lung tissue and the soft tissue again. When it happens like this, if you look at IGS and RC code, and some of the AXB and all code, they are pretty accurate here in this region, but in this region you see the deviation for AAA, AXB and CCC, they are not very good actually. So if you are dose to the water versus dose to the medium, that is one question comes. Dose to the water, actually in this situation dose to the water is here somewhere, whereas dose to the medium is coming very close to that. So this is how it is. So the Monte Carlo, the differences, if you see AAA versus dose to the water, dose to the medium, the dose to the water comes like this, and the same plan if you do the dose to the medium, it is like this. Then if you do dose to the water minus AAA, this is how the difference actually, this is something alarming. Whereas the dose to the medium versus AAA, this is the area where actually you are looking into the overestimation of the dose, where the interface of the bone and to the soft tissue, where the spinal cord nerves are coming. So that is the area where you are looking at the uncertainties. So the next one, or maybe the last one, is triple F. Why do we need triple F? So this one publication answers by J. Murphy. Why do we need triple F? Even in case of intracranial SRS SRTs, if you see, as the time passes 0, 5, 10, 15, 20, 25 minutes, you think that I have made a rigid immobilization, patient is perfectly, but when you do an imaging here, it will give an error of up to about 3 mm. As the time passes here, 3 mm. That means speed is the key here. If I go with the high speed treatment, definitely my error is less. Even if it is intracranial, as the time passes, the error is going to be there. The setup error is going to be there. So this is the reason why we need triple F. So, but triple F is a double-edged sword. Actually, it's very difficult sometimes to commission properly or to monitor it properly. It needs very extensive measurement and very extensive proper monitoring of that. So, for example, if you see here, if your setup error is by 1 millimeter, the blue is the ideal situation, whereas the red is 1 millimeter away. If your phantom setup is 1 millimeter away, you see that 1.7% asymmetry if 2 points of technique is used for verification of symmetry. That is why we never use this particular technique. You understand why we came out of all those the different protocols for this one, triple F. This is one of the reasons. A small offset of this will give you huge uncertainty in terms of asymmetry, and if you ask the engineer to correct this, very difficult, because there is no steering coil which is responsible for the small jerks which we are seeing because of our measurement issues. So one last test to be done in the linear accelerator again, especially if you are having a true beam or a variant one. See, one issue here is now in the linear accelerator is you have a treatment ISO and you have a KV imaging ISO and you have MV imaging ISO. There are 3 ISO centers in one particular place. So how are you ensured? You are using some patients KV imaging, some patients MV imaging. So we need to have a methodology where we can say all these 3 are perfectly aligned each other, or if not, what is the error of that? So there is a protocol called IsoCal where you can fix that particular phantom onto the couch and run imaging, the MV imaging as well as KV imaging. The same thing in terms of Electa, they have ball bearing test where you put a small lead ball on the bearing ball on the couch and go for MV and CT image of that and register it and see what is the actual error. Here, due to the gantry sagging or the deviation of one to another is corrected automatically as the feedback system in the variant. So that needs to be verified before doing an SRT. So We have plenty of QA systems available, but remember, they're all not in line with the radiosurgery resolutions. What we are seeing here is 1 millimeter, so they are not up to our satisfaction. Some of them are available in as of now, like the MyQA SRS by IBA or SRS map check. They all have very high resolution, like 0.4 to 0.48 millimeter of the resolutions in the isocenter plane for that. So maybe of good choice. The best choice for the patient dosimetry is the film, and that is what actually has to be seen very seriously. So thank you very much. So the talk is open for any discussions. If anybody is having any discussions, please raise your hand and ask me.
It was a good informative talk, sir. So there are many questions from audience, and first we'll try to go one by one.
Yeah.
So a question has been asked that how Vinson-Lewis test performing in TrueBeam 6D couch, what equipment is recommended?
From Varian you get a test tool for Winston-Lewis test actually. There is a small cube, you may be having it in your center. A small cube where is the center of the cube is having a small ball bearing, which can be used for that. Or as I said, we don't have to depend on anybody. We can design our own thing. Ultimately, you need to see the projection of 1 or 2 mm ball bearing on your film or your EPID. If you use that particular cube, what is provided by the Varian, you can use the EPID image itself, and you can see for different EPID images how the position is deviating. That is available with the vendor itself, and he gives it usually with the machine.
Another question has been asked by Devilina ma'am, respected Dr. Holla sir. Can we treat CSI patient with a JAP system? So I think audience are more interested about more to know about.
See, I as of my understanding, that is the stereotactic machine. So there is no question of CSI coming into that category, because CSI where you need the whole of a brain plus the spine treatment. So that won't fit into that category. That is a stereotactic, dedicated stereotactic machine, and only the difference is it is placed on the gyroscope. The whole linac is placed on the gyroscope, so that motion is unlimited and pretty fast also. And it's a self-shielded machine in all 3 dimensions, so that you don't need a bunker. That is the only difference with that.
A question has been asked, sir, what are the typical dose constraints for brainstem and whole brain in these treatment? What protocol is followed?
So actually, the latest development in this normal structure constraint is the high-tech guidelines. How we had something like the Quantec, we have now high-tech guidelines. If anybody wants, please put your information to me. I can share it with you guys. Which is having almost all the dose constraints, based on the evidences, and also the TG102 from APM, and also the ISRS guidelines. There are plenty of them available for brainstem, 1 fraction versus 3 fractions versus 5 fractions. The dose constraints are available actually. Very easily it's accessible. If anybody wants it, they can actually question to me. I'll give that to them actually. I will share it with them.
A question has been asked, sir, can we use fusion with CT and PET images here, I think for SRS?
Yeah.
You want to ask?
The role of PET in the brain is very limited. They don't use PET images in the brain. That is the major limitations of the PET. Unless you go for some the MR, the brain dedicated isotopes, the brain dedicated image sequences, which are very rarely used. The reason here is the PET resolution is not less than 1 centimeter, 5 mm to 1 centimeter. Especially when you go to extracranial, one PET acquisition position where it goes for more than in the digital machine, it goes about 5 to 8 minutes. So you are acquiring information over a period of 5 to 8 minutes, minimum of that. And in that 5 to 8 minutes, that many breathing cycles are done, patient would have moved. So when you do this, the spatial accuracy of that uptakes what you are getting from the PET is not enough for stereotactic works. So stereotactic, in the stereotactic area, in that sense, MR is much better than PET, and PET can be used as an indicator only. We cannot use an absolute sense for doing the delineations.
A question has been asked by Rohidas. Mr. Rohidas, what is minimum required MLC width for MLC Linac-based SRS, SRT, and SBRT, sir?
Yeah, this is actually a debatable question, because now if vendor hears this, they will come back and say I'm doing SRS SRT with the Tomo, or I'm doing SRS SRT with 1 centimeter MLC. All those publications there are publications from Indian people saying SRS done with 5 mm width. So it is very simple. When you are doing SRS or SRT, how many leaves are used in one particular segment, that actually decides what is the uncertainty in that particular area. If you're using only one leaf, for example, you have a 2.5 millimeter MLC and your target size is 2 millimeter, that means only one leaf is being used as a modulating factor. When you do that, suppose there is a 1 millimeter error of the positional inaccuracy in that one leaf, that directly translate into the inaccuracy of more than 50% to that particular tumor. So that decides, okay, I need to have at least 3 to 4 millimeters, so that 1 millimeter, even if I have divided by 4, that means 0.25 only ultimately translates into the patient tumor. So if I have 2.5 into 4, that means 1 centimeter tumor. If I have, maybe I can use MLC of 2.5. A millimeter width. Otherwise, I need to get into the cone only where the inaccuracies are not there. So that is how we can decide. SBRTs, now SBRTs are not very small. As you see, the liver or pancreas or even stomach or any cases, SBRTs are not less than 7 to 8 centimeter in length. When you have 7 to 8 centimeter length target, maybe 5 mm is good enough. You can use 5 mm also. But when you are using in the brain, where your target is not more than 1.5 or 2 centimeter in size, diameter, I think 2.5 is required. You can't use even 5 mm for the brain. That's what my experience is.
A question has been asked, sir, what are the parameters other than target size to be taken into account? Someone is using 5 mm MLC, sir.
That's what the answer remains almost same. The 5 mm MLC, when you are using it, mainly the why I am saying this MLCs, one is the inaccuracies, that is one thing. Another is when you use a bigger leaf, the dose gradient also will be actually bigger. You cannot get a sharp dose fall, even if you are triple F. What you get with the sharp dose fall with the 2.5, you may not be able to get it with 5 millimeter MLC. So this actually a differentiator. These two parameters, if you decide on that, you can select which one actually has to be used.
A question has been asked by Dr. Rajesh Kenikar, sir. So Electa claim the software modulation of MLC width of 5 mm to sub mm. Any comment on it? And particularly on achieved effective MLC width and accuracy?
Yeah. See, here is the software game comes into picture. The leaf physically is 5 millimeter only, but what they have is they have this the main jaws, the Y jaws usually.
Yeah.
So they use that as a modulation and they make it 5 into slice 2.5. But remember, the same jaw is getting used from one end to the another end in this particular situation. So if there is an inaccuracy of 1 millimeter in the jaw, throughout the field you will get this inaccuracy. I don't suggest this intracranially. You may do all those exercises extracranially, no problem, because as I said, it is more than 7 to 8 centimeter. But when you are looking into a small tumor inside the brain, I don't want to use this system at all for intracranial SRS or SRTs.
Okay. So a question has been asked, sir, in case of CT and MR fusion, which image is considered T1 or T2 weighted?
Yeah, say the
Is
MR
related
fusion,
to MR image?
MR fusion, usually for a brain case, we want a T1 plane and a T1 contrast, T2 and flare image. These are the 4 sequences we usually use. Many times what happens, all these things are taken in one DICOM coordinates. Once you fuse T1, T2 is automatically fused, or T1C or contrast images are automatically fused. But what happens is once you take T2 images, then you give a contrast. At the time of contrast, the patient would have moved. The position of T2 and T1 contrast is not very accurate. In that situations, we fuse T2 separately and we fuse T1C separately and flare images separately. So all these three will have three different fusion chains, and that is how it is being used, because contouring guy will be using T1 for some purpose, T2 for looking into the edema, so everything will be used by contouring persons. So fusion needs to be accurate even in T1 and even for T2 or whatever image sequence you have. The fusion should be very accurate for all the imaging sequences.
So there are many questions. A question has been asked. Please explain about dosimetry and clinical advantage of a dedicated SRS SRT unit versus LINAC unit.
Yeah, see, dedicated SRS or SRT unit, I think you mean by Gamma knife.
Gamma knife or cyber knife.
And cyber knife. Gamma knife is, as the name says, it is rigid actually. It needs invasive frame. You need to fix it, but you can coat for an accuracy of 0.6 millimeter, which is impossible for anybody else. You know, that is accuracy. But where do you need this accuracy? Only in functional neurosurgeries. You don't need this 0.6 or 1 millimeter accuracies for non-functional areas where the tumor or malignant tumor is seen, visible. When you are looking at cases like trigeminal neuralgia, they are not tumors. You are just trying to shrink a nerve compression. Or you are looking at an epilepsy where it's actually not a disease, it's a disease, it's not a tumor. Where you are going to create a damage to one particular nerve, you need an accuracy of 0.6 or 0.5 millimeter. So there we look into the gamma knife. Looking into the cyber knife, it does almost everything of gamma knife, but gamma knife is limited maximum up to maybe C1 and C2 spine. You cannot go below that. Whereas the cyber knife can go to any other sites also. But the accuracy of the cyber knife is in the hands of a physicist. It's a physics run machine, 100% I can say, compared to even linear accelerator. So how you commission, how you maintain the QA program, and how do you look into the various parameters coming back as a feedback from the cyber knife decides how the treatment is going on in that mission. Whereas in the linear accelerator, definitely I don't go with the functional neurosurgeries in the LINAC. My personal experience not to do that, where you are giving 80 gray or 120 grays of dose to a one small 2 mm or 3 mm shot. LINAC is not at all advisable, because whatever you do by the end of the day, couch, collimator and the gantries all will move, and they are fixed on mechanical aspects, and it cannot be given for less than 1 to 1.5 millimeter of accuracy. So that is not enough in functional radiosurgeries.
A question has been asked by Dr. Rajesh Kenikal sir. Can you opinion about the impact of positioning system like base plate, carbon fiber versus non-carbon fiber base plate, and impact of cardal material on end-to-end tests, sir?
Yeah, see, the positioning system like the base plate is actually used in the dose calculations. If not, you can model it like Monaco, for example. You can model your own couch system and feed that as a couch. Even in Varian also you can have actually your own couch system, including all the material compositions. You can put it as a couch materials. So when you put it, these informations during the dose calculations, you will not miss any the dose calculation things. That means you are not going to introduce any error because of that. But at the same time, if you are using very high like the plastic material or a Delrin material as an immobilization thing from the posterior side, when you want to treat a spine cases, remember the skin dose is another aspect here actually. The patient can develop a very bad skin dose because of these things. So that has to be taken care. It's very simple. You mark it and make sure that you put one of the constraints as the skin dose in your optimizer. So it does the job. But the attenuation correction has to be done irrespective of whether it is carbon fiber or it is a cradle material or anything like that. Because what material you are using, that has to be used on E2E test also. So everything with how a patient is undergoing treatment, the same thing you are going to keep it on for your E2E test.
So a question has been asked, your experience of Encompass SRS SRT positioning system like SIMS, open mask or mouth bite system?
Yeah, see, Encompass, we now came into Encompass for last about 3 years. One of the issues what I am facing, it is very good from patient's comfort point of view, no doubt about it. one issue what I'm facing is, to remove the phobia of the patients, they have cut open the main area where actually you can immobilize. If you look at the skull anatomy, the main area where you can immobilize is the eye and the nose bridge. These two are immobilized. The nose bridge literally locks the patient rotation, nose bridge. But now you replaced it, cut open that area and replaced it with the mouth bite. When you are putting a mouth bite on the patient, mouth bite, we ask the patient to bite that piece with front two teeth. Okay, so that is not constant always. Today's 10th two teeth biting, he may not do the same thing tomorrow. Because of these issues, we face about 1 to 1.2 degrees of error once in a while for the patient. So the patient is not comfortably biting it on the day of simulation or at the day of treatment. We get pitch and we also get error actually. So this is the issue what I am facing with Encompass. Compared to that, my experience is the simple reinforced mask with the mouth bite is giving us better results than Encompass in our experience. So that is what I think I should tell.
So there is a system in Electa that called fraction. So any comment on that, sir?
Fraction, I worked, my initial SRS works on fraction. There the problem what I faced is from the vacuum system. We can't, at the age of 40 or 50, I don't think any human is available without any dental caries. Okay, when you put that dental material and suck and create a vacuum, it really hurts the patient. It really pains the patient. So that is one of the issues I am facing. But when it clips properly on as per the plan, it is much better immobilizer than other things, because it is, again, we are moving towards the frame-based, frameless but rigid immobilization system. So that was a better option if everything goes well. Otherwise, it depends on manufacturing also, because you have to make that dental piece for every patient. There are molds available where you plug in, where you push in the materials and all. It's a consumable thing, but it worked well for some of the patients.
A question has been asked: why require different chamber volume for a different dosimetric measurement? So, for this
this itself is a big thing, because if you look back at the small field dosimetry system, when the field is small than the chamber volume, then what are we measuring actually? So that is the question. So when the chamber volume becomes substantially big enough compared to the field size, the measurement is not accurate. So that is the reason we need different chamber volumes for different dosimetric requirements. Depends. That means anything above 5 by 5, we can definitely go with one chamber. Whenever you want to measure less than 5 by 5, we need a small field chambers.
So a question has been asked: how do you perform SRS plan for AVM patient having endovascular immobilization gel, sir?
I don't have any experience on endovascular embolization, this one. Okay, embolization you are taking, fine. See, embolization is going to be there. Embolized one is going to be there during treatment also. So best thing is you attribute to that particular material and do the dose calculations accordingly, then you have no issues. Only thing is, if you mark it and override the density, then only issue comes. This embolization, whatever they have done, it usually retains during the treatment, so it won't vanish, so you can use it for dose calculation.
What minimum target site one should go for a Linac based SRS, sir? So
not less than 1 centimeter.
Okay.
Not 1 centimeter, yeah.
Can we use Linac without small field dosimetry for SRS SBRT?
No, not possible. that's very
okay. So here we are discussing about small field. So a question has been asked by Dr. Kaganpreet: if someone have my QA SRS detector, then does it has potential to replace film, or still films are required?
See, film has got its own thing. What we are looking here in from a film is a nanomillimeter of spacing, which is impossible by anybody else. My QA SRS, as I said, its limitation is about 4 millimeter spatially, but when you are looking at SRS here now, MyQA or any other QA detector based one, it's all the concept of sampling. How many points you are there in terms of sampling. It may be for VMAT, it may be for a large field detector, large field VMAT or rapid arc. How many points you are collecting, you are matching that many points to the treatment planning system one, and you are doing the gamma analysis. From that point of view, MyQSRS is pretty fast, good enough to do the patient specific QA, which is impossible because when we speak about the film, the major uncertainty comes here is the scanner uncertainties due to the film, and once you scan it, how you are going to correlate that especially to the planning system one. That is a major challenge which everybody faces. So this particular aspect is nullified by MyQSRS1. So I think that definitely does a good work for a person on day-to-day basis for a quick and faster verification of SRS.
How do you manage SRS plan for large volume AVM, volume stage or dose stage?
My experience is volume staged only. We have treated several cases even in CyberKnife and previous CyberKnife in the Linux also. So what I used to do is, the whole AVMs are being split into 2 or 3, maximum 2 only, not gone to 3 at all. So you give a 12 gray shot of 1 and you mark exactly where you have given, and the next time after 3 months the patient comes back for the second stage. At that time, that overlap area of the first one and second one, so you need to fuse the first and second information and get that dose information also, and make sure that the junction of the first and second is not overdosed. So to avoid this, what I used to do is one slice of the for example, if I am splitting that into craniocaudally, in the first session, if I am treating the cranial side AVM part, stage 1, at that time the caudal part of that one is underdosed. The second stage, the cranial part of the second stage is underdosed. So if you reduce the 50% dose of the 2 stages of the 2 slices, then by adding them you will not be exceeding more than 100%. That's what we used to do it.
So there are many questions. So last question we will take on this. So phantom like Ruby by PW are EPID image are used to carry out Winslow test. Please comment on accuracy of these method, and thanks for informative lecture.
See, the Ruby or what happens is that is a total and independent system. Each one validates everything. When you are doing some test like that, you are testing with the help of an imager which is again attached to the gantry that comes as a secondary choice for me actually. So I would like to do everything on the first hand without any dependency on the machine. If that is not available, then only I'll go with EPID images. If Ruby is available, that is the first one. Otherwise, I'll go to EPID.
Okay. So many questions, but I think we are already short of time. It's already 8 p.m. So it's we are expecting for 1, but it's more than 1.5 hours. But it was definitely a very wonderful and informative scientific talk, and very nicely presented. So all faces
thank you.
Thank you for that.
Thank you everybody.
And thank you from CMPI to you, sir, and as well as all the participants who attended this web lecture. So see you on next month web lecture on last week of Friday on April. So thanks to all.
Thank you.
Thank you, sir. Thank you.
Yeah. Bye.
And then, so, okay, you're already out. Okay. So, for all, if sir will share any document, I will share to you all, and just message me and I will share all those documents if someone is asking. So we'll share. Thank you to all.